You're listening to a Thames Estuary Partnership podcast, celebrating London's famous tidal river. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Talk of the Thames. I'm your host, Chloe Russell, and I am especially excited to share today's episode with you. Joining us is author Dr. Wallace J Nichols, who wrote Bluemind, the surprising science that shows how being near, in, on, or underwater can make you happier, healthier, more connected, and better at what you do. Wallace helps people establish healthier, more creative and regenerative relationships with themselves, each other, and their environment through water, wonder, wellness, and wildlife. I discuss with Wallace how people can become more connected to their own blue mind, especially in the perspective of busy Londoners who have access to the River Thames, along with some other surprises to switch into this blue mind. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome. I've got Wallace J Nichols with me. I'm very excited to greet this guest. How are you, Wallace?
I'm doing great, and it's really good to be chatting with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've just had a really short discussion about how Wallace J Nichols would like to be known as, and we're going to go by J. So if that gets confusing for anyone, that is why.
Middle initial, that's it.
Yeah. That's the one. That's the one. Jay, can you please explain to us what you do, and we can start developing from there?
I'm by training, I'm a marine biologist, and I've worked to sort of make the oceans and waters healthier. I've worked on endangered species and plastic pollution and climate change and fisheries. Through that work, started really paying attention to how people felt when they were around the water, including myself, and noticed that generally people were in a better mood when they were near, in, on, or underwater, including myself, and got more curious about that as a possible way to do our job better in terms of taking better care of the watery parts of the world. But well, if we really understood what's motivating people, and the emotional health component. So kind of went looking for a book about that and couldn't find one, and then tried to convince some other people that they should write it, and I failed at that. And then ended up writing this book called Bluemind about how the water makes us feel from a science perspective. So since then, that's what I've been doing. In addition to saving sea turtles, I also try to help people better connect with their water so that we are healthier and the water is healthier. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's lovely. And you've coined it Bluemind, and that's the title of your book.
The name seems to be useful. That's a phrase that people find to be useful, so they use it.
With your book, you have like a lot of case studies. And I was wondering what sort of stories have come to you that be shared to you about Bluemind, because it seems like it's an ever-growing community, and it feeds and thrives off itself, and it creates this really lovely, like, recyclable energy.
Yeah, it's been amazing since working on this topic, how many stories there are. And one of the most common things I hear from people is they thought they were alone. They thought they were the only person that had this blue mind feeling inside of them. And they always struggle to explain it to others. And what I think the book does is it helps people understand that, no, there are lots of people who feel this way for all of human history, in fact, all over the world. And then people start sharing their stories. And I've just heard from so many people about how spending time in their water or near it has helped them through the roughest patches in their lives, especially the last 2 years, as we've all gone through changes and challenges and grieved and mourned the loss of loved ones and loss of plans and loss of dreams, and just hear from so many people about that, how they've put these ideas into practice and how it's gotten them through. And then I hear from people who move house. You know, they say, I got to be closer to the water. And maybe go live on a boat, or they make a big decision about where they're going to live or how they're going to work in addition to changing their lifestyle. So the idea of Blue Mind, the science is growing and pretty clear, and the practice is expanding. More and more people are putting Blue Mind science into practice with or without a prescription, or what I like to refer to as a blue scription.
That's good.
Yeah.
So for some of our listeners who aren't very familiar with the term, how can you achieve a blue mind?
Well, really, wherever you are in the world, you don't need to be near a big river or a big ocean or a big lake. Any water at all, the water in your home, in your bathtub, if you have access to a pool, swimming pool, or a tub, a hot tub.
Even better.
Yeah. Of course, the lakes, the rivers, the oceans, the ponds, the creeks, those are all great ways to achieve Blue Mind. Really, any activity that feels good to you. And, it shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't be something that makes you really uncomfortable or makes you feel bad. But also, if your city has fountains.
Oh, really?
Go and sit by a fountain and listen to it. Maybe bring someone and sit by the fountain together and see how the sound of the water may affect your conversation. Urban waterfronts, the cities around the world are taking their waterfronts much more seriously in terms of public access. And then there's a couple more categories. One is virtual water. So art, poetry, music, a recording of water sounds, any depiction of water where there actually is no water there is what I refer to as virtual water. And that can help you shift your mood. Decorating the space that you live in or your office with water related art, especially maybe art that you made, a photograph that you took of a special place. That's the art that works best for me. Recordings of the water that you love. So if you go down to the river and make a recording of the sounds, and then you listen to that once in a while, or send the recording to someone you love and have them listen to it. And then I think the last category would be imaginary water. So just closing your eyes and thinking about the water that makes you happy shifts you into that blue mind state through the power of your own imagination, which, by the way, is extremely powerful. And human imagination is what solves problems and makes the world better. Or worse in some cases. So let's use our imagination as a force for good, and imagine the water you really care about, and use that. If you like to meditate or have a mindfulness practice, bringing water into that is extremely useful. Yeah. So wherever you are, I think you can practice Blue Mind.
I love that. Thank you. That was really, really insightful. The part I picked up on was the sound. Would you get a different effect, like a cognitive reaction, if you listen to the ocean maybe against like a river or a creek, or do you get a slightly different effect?
So one of the things that the sound of water does is it masks other sounds. And if the other sounds that are being masked carry a lot of information, then the water sound simplifies the auditory environment.
Wow.
Which is a good thing in our crazy world. So we're always bombarded with information, in visual information, auditory information, somatic information, signs and screens and papers. There's just a lot of information coming in all the time.
Sure, yeah.
Even when we're relaxing. Even when we're doing a podcast, we listen to a podcast. And then water helps just quiet all of that information for a moment.
Wow.
And so if the water sound that you've chosen to listen to is doing a good job, it's masking voices, it's masking distant background noises, and it's just giving you a break from processing that information. But it's also interesting, but it doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't demand you to work to solve the mystery of what's in the information. So the rhythm of the ocean tends to lull people a bit into that blue mind state. But so does the sound of a river, or a fountain or rain. And so I would say, there are differences, but the differences tend to relate more to your experiences and your culture. So if you really, really, really despise the rain and the sound of it makes you depressed, I don't recommend that you listen to recordings of the sound of rain. Maybe you switch to a river or an ocean. But some people love the sound of rain and they fear the ocean.
Yeah.
So it really is an individualistic decision process. And what I try to do is give people a long list of things to work with, a long menu of possibilities. And then within that vast menu of possibilities, pick what works for you individually based on, of course, your biology, but also your culture and also your lived experiences. And then you end up with a set of activities and practices that you can do anywhere for the rest of your life that work for you. And they may be very different than what works for me. So somebody might say, I love surfing big waves. And another person says, I don't want to get into the ocean above my neck. And so they're going to have a very different plan in terms of blue mind activities. So, and everything's kind of on a continuum. There's extreme blue mind, which for me might be floating at night in a warm ocean with bioluminescence all around me and a sky filled with stars. That might be the extreme version of blue mind for me. And then over on a milder end would be playing a Jack Johnson song on my guitar that involves some ocean inspiration, which is, soothing and reminds me of the ocean, but it is not the same as floating on my back in a warm tropical ocean.
Sure.
So you've got that, and there's a continuum, lots of things in between that have various degrees of soothing qualities and calming qualities.
God, you really paint a picture there. That sounds great. How about with green mind? Is it comparable?
Absolutely. So when I started working on blue mind, most of the research had been on green mind or green space.
Okay.
Which is why I focused so heavily on water, because most of the research was biased towards land. And so green space refers to plants, blue space refers to water, and academics like to add terminology to make life more complicated. So rather than call it plants, they call it green space. Rather than call it water, they call it blue space. So the majority of the research had been done already on green space. And interestingly, in that research, whenever water was introduced, the effects were stronger. So green space with some water produced better results than green space alone. So really the best combination is being at the edge of the water. So people get a little unnerved when they can't see the land when they're in the water. So having some view of land from the water or some view of water from the land is kind of our happy place, which makes sense from a survival perspective and from an evolutionary perspective that, being at the edge of the water is where the action is in terms of life, really. And so that our brain and our nervous systems have a positive response to that sweet spot makes perfect sense, really. And so the green space research has a few more years of work published than the blue space research, but the enthusiasm about blue mind is causing it to catch up. But really, what we're talking about is nature. And I like to talk about water rather than nature in general, because people perceive that you need to go outside and explore and find nature. And the reality is that you can also find it in your home, in your city, in your workplace, in your own quiet imagination. And so I like to talk more about water in all of its forms than nature, but nature is certainly a category.
It's great. It's interesting that you don't necessarily have to be in the water. Like you get a huge benefit just by standing next to it. And I was thinking with the Thames, you can do water sports on the Thames, but not necessarily everybody in London can have access to that, but everyone can have access to the Thames Path. So you can actually get a huge benefit of this blue mind just by going and walking next to the Thames.
That's right. And, you're seeing, I would say Europe is ahead. The UK in particular, by the way, is ahead on the research that around why that is true, and also on really prioritizing the paths along the water for emotional, mental health, therapeutic reasons. I'm hoping the United States follows and learns from the lessons that are occurring elsewhere. And really you're so lucky if you have a river in your community, and you're so very lucky if you have access to that river, and incredibly lucky if you have a path along the river that you can access. There's a lot of great rivers that go through cities. The waterfront is not very accessible. It's built up, it's privatized, or it's just a complete mess. And all of these initiatives to change that, I think, they have economic benefits, of course. They have some ecological benefits, but they also have these vast emotional wellness benefits for everyone, really. And so you're right. You don't need to get in the river. Maybe you don't really want to always, depending on where you live and the time of year. But you could get on it on a boat and paddle, and you can certainly walk along its edge. And I think it all works better when you're more aware of the benefits. I found that I think understanding the science doesn't make it less appealing. I think it makes it even more so. People take the time and prioritize it because they know that it's good for them, and they know that it's going to be enjoyable. Even stopping, stop at a spot along the river and just take a few minutes to really listen and really watch and pay attention to how it shifts your mind, and then continue your walk. So those are good practices.
Yeah, that's great advice. How long would you recommend is a good amount of time to kind of switch into that mindset and benefit from it?
Well, there's a whole bunch of research that's been coming out about the dose, is what you're referring to. So what is the dose of Blue Mind? And some studies suggest 20 minutes 3 times a week. I really, again, go back to the individualistic approach where what suits your schedule? Can you do it at home? Can you do it outside? As often as possible. If you're carrying a lot of stress, then you're probably going to want to practice Blue Mind a little more often. If your life is stress-free, then it's a little bit less urgent. Maybe your day job is a lifeguard, so you're sitting there looking at water all day long. Well, then it might be a different approach. The general recommendation to try to practice Blue Mind 3 times a week in some form is good. And usually what happens if you set out to do it for 15 seconds, you end up doing the activity for at least 15 minutes, if not much longer. If I said, go walk by your river for 15 seconds, that doesn't sound hard. So you're likely to try it, but you're not going to go for a 15-second walk. You're at least going to go out for longer. So it's kind of a way of building new habits. And I would mix in, take a proper bath, lock the door, light a candle, add whatever you want to the mix, maybe some music, water sounds, and take a nice long bath, at least once a week, but put that on your calendar. Like, this is my bath night. Leave me alone. Locking the door, maybe get a glass of wine or something, and
nice.
Really prioritize it. So really, it's an individual thing, but I think I think what the research is showing that it doesn't require you to take a half a day or a massive vacation to get some of the benefits. And the goal is to figure out what works for you and build new habits around it.
That's great. Thank you. So people in London, they don't necessarily have to go to the Thames to get bluemind. They can actually do it at home. It's really accessible to everybody in all shapes and forms. And that's a really strong message.
Yeah, I think making that list of what are the wild waters that you would like to visit, and maybe you can get them to them easily, or maybe it's a little more effortful. What are the domestic waters you have access to in your home? Maybe there's a pool, a community pool. Maybe you own a pool. Some people have pools, or a tub, or a shower. And then the next list to make is, what are the urban waters that, besides the Thames, are there any urban fountains that are nice to sit by, or tributaries? And then, of course, the virtual water. Is there a museum with paintings of water that you really love? Well, go look at those. Do you have artwork that depicts, this feeling? Is there a song about water, about the ocean? My go-to right now is a song called "Run It," and It's by a band called My Morning Jacket.
Okay.
And there's just the chorus is just all about water, and it's a great one. And then there's another great song called "Bluemind" by Alexi Murdoch, Scottish guy, and it's a beautiful song. And it's actually my alarm in the morning is that song. And I wake up to Alexi singing "Bluemind" every morning, and it's nice. It's calm. It wakes me up, does its job, but it doesn't jar me to begin the day with kind of an annoying alarm. So there's lots of little things you can add to your day that cost nothing and will help you achieve some bluemind throughout the day.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. Yeah. Really good advice. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I've got a question from the public that I'd like to ask you. And it was a really interesting point, actually. You've probably thought about this. It goes, do you think humanity could exist on a red planet like Mars? And what would be the physiological effects living on Mars, if any?
Interesting. Well, I think we're going to make a run for it. I would not say that humanity will exist on Mars anytime soon. I think a few individuals will persist on Mars, probably not thrive. They may survive for a period of time. And I use the comparison here on Earth fairly often. If you want to start to feel what it's like, to live on a planet without water, maybe, impose a strict lockdown on your lifestyle and stay in your house, and maybe add a higher level of stress to every day, and maybe limit communication between people and limit social interaction between people. And you'll get a little bit of a hint, very, very mild hint of what it might be like. And we have all just gone through that experiment where we've locked ourselves down. We've limited social interactions. We've raised the stress level significantly. And it's, people have really felt what it's like to be cut off from wild nature, and that's unfortunate and kind of a product of the pandemic, but it's a little bit of a hint of what it might be like to be in isolation on a red planet. Yeah.
And how about the color difference? Because we see blue everywhere. We see it in the sky. We see it in water. When we think about water, we often think of blue as well.
Right. I think we would, if you were trying to be happy on Mars, I think you'd probably bring a lot of blue things with you.
Yeah.
You might bring at least some virtual water that you could enjoy, even if it's like, your favorite water video, water movie, that would probably be on the list. Maybe a copy of Moby Dick. page one.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And are you working on any other bluemind books or projects at the moment?
One of the things I'm always trying to do is translate bluemind into other languages and formats and forms. And for example, doing this podcast is a way to take the basic ideas and reach people who may not read a 300-page nonfiction book, but to deliver the ideas to everyone. And so constantly working on making bluemind common knowledge and common practice, because I think that everyone needs to understand their own blue mind, and everybody needs to have access to it in some form wherever they are in the world. And by everyone, I mean 8 billion people. So we do have a lot of work to do to achieve that goal. So I'm kind of always working on some aspect of that. And kind of back to your point at the beginning, I hear from so many people in so many different ways about how these ideas make their lives better and healthier. And that is like the fuel of the whole thing, the positive feedback. And at the same time, there is so much red mind, in the world right now. So many people are hurting, grieving, have lost something, are feeling the anxiety and the stress and the burnout, and aren't sure what to do about it. And so I think the urgency is there, and the efficacy is there of how taking these ideas, delivering them to people who need them most. And one of the studies that was done by the University of Exeter Medical School, our friends there, shows that the biggest benefits of bluemind come from those who need it the most. The people who need it the least get a benefit as well, but the people who need it most, who are carrying the most stress, the most anxiety, have the least connection to their water. When they have it, when this, switch is flipped, experience the biggest movement of the needle, which is really exciting. I mean, it makes the whole endeavor, I think, really worthwhile.
Do you get quite a lot of people sending in their stories to you? Is it quite a frequent thing, or is it building over time?
I would say that the idea is becoming more, we're moving towards it becoming common knowledge. There are a lot more stories, and at the same time, diminishing attribution of the idea to me, which is the goal, if that makes sense. So the idea is becoming common knowledge without attribution, which in fact is the goal. And therefore, as people put the ideas into practice, they don't necessarily know that there was an author involved. And so the chain of referring their stories back to someone is broken. Necessarily so. I'm not complaining about that at all. It's in fact the goal of the process, to make it that people understand bluemind and they don't even know why they understand it. It's just part of being alive, that they learned it at every step of the way through grade school and throughout life, and from their family members and neighbors and teachers and guides and coaches. So that's my hope, is that we continue to move in that direction. But I get news alerts when bluemind is in the news, and I hear
that's cool.
There's a gallery called the Bluemind Gallery, and there's a coffee roaster called Bluemind Coffee, and there's a tattoo parlor called Bluemind Tattoos, and there's a real estate agency called Bluemind Real Estate. And I have nothing to do with any of them other than they like the name, and then they apply it in really interesting ways in how they do what they do. Several wonderful songs called Bluemind, the one by Alexei Murdoch I mentioned, but there's a few others out there. That's just part of the process, I think, making it common knowledge.
That's great. So, Jay, have you got any takeaway messages for our listeners?
Well, if you're listening and you're saying, yeah, I know all this, and this is not new. I love water and I feel better by water. My thoughts about that are, you're lucky. Good for you. That's very fortunate that you have lived that way. And that those of us who get it and have access, need to share it with those that we know who may be feeling kind of red mind or gray mind, which is that burnout. We all know people who are really burnt out right now. And if you figured out how to practice blue mind and avoid burnout, that's really wonderful. Congratulations. Lucky you. Get somebody who hasn't figured it out to go with you and to the river, or on your boat, or for a walk, or for a swim. And that will be a good thing for them. I promise they will appreciate it. It might save their lives, and I don't say that lightly, but it is very likely that it will make their life a little bit more pleasant. If you get this and it makes sense, and perhaps you're already practicing blue mind, share the love a bit and expand it. Help us make it common knowledge for everybody. I guess that's what I would end with, as far as a message.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's really meaningful. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure on behalf of all the listeners, thank you so much for that. That was really lovely. Thank you. And I will probably say bye now.
Okay.
So, goodbye.
All right. And let me just apologize if the distant sound of my daughter making a smoothie in the kitchen was distracting.
Is that what that was?
Yeah.
I was wondering what that was. I was thinking maybe it was like leaf blower. That's what I thought it was.
It sounded like I could hear her pour frozen blueberries into the blender. And I was thinking, oh no, here comes the sound of the blender.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for tuning in with me today. I really appreciate that. And it's been so lovely to speak with you. I feel like calmer as well from just talking about all of this with you, which is hopefully what our listeners will be achieving as well.
Well, that's virtual blue mind. Even talking about water calmly can help us really feel that thing, that we feel around it. So,
amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. It's wonderful to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you. You've now reached the end of today's episode, and I hope you've enjoyed listening about all the ways that you can achieve your blue mind. To find out more about Wallace's work, you can visit the links in this episode's show notes. So why not spend some time this week having a delicious bath and some quality me time? After all, it's scientifically proven that it will make you feel really good. As part of the theme in today's episode, we have included the sounds of some lapping water recorded by the River Thames. Thank you so much for listening. This episode has been brought to you by me, Chloe Russell, on behalf of the Thames Estuary Partnership, and I look forward to welcoming you next time.